Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about the Shema again. This will be our second lesson. And just quickly, remember we talked about last week or the week before, actually we skipped a week. The week before, the Shema is considered one of the holiest prayers in Judaism, but it certainly is more like a declaration than a prayer. And we sort of examined that a little bit, right? And we talked about it as a declaration. I also mentioned that it's a declaration, I feel, that allows us or tells us to practice a mindlessness meditation and a mindfulness meditation, both. And the beginning of the Shema, I believe, is that directive towards a mindlessness meditation. And I'll explain that as I get into the details of it. And then the second half of the Shema talks mostly about a mindfulness practice. So I thought it would be good to examine this in some detail, because I think it will help us both with our mindlessness practice and give us some direction in our mindfulness practice. So all of you have been studying with me for a long time in this Kabbalistic mystical meditation tradition. So we all know that the Kabbalists in our tradition believed that these sound vibrations, in particular this Hebrew alphabet sound vibrations, were the building blocks of creation. So these vibrations, these frequencies emanate, and they have a creation and a formation, and things occur in that way. And there's a particular order to them. In our Sefer Yetzirah class, we call Sefer Hashtel Shilot, right? Jack knows that now clearly what that means. So as we're going forward in this study of the Shema, we have to have that as a background, which is these vibrations, these sound vibrations of these letters come forth and creation happens. But there's an order. And when you add order to sound and vibration, math comes into the picture. So you have order, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, you suddenly have numbers, right? So we're gonna look just briefly, which we don't do very often, at some simple gematria. So in this tradition, each of these sound vibrations have a number associated with them. And looking at those numbers tells us some things. And as those numbers tell us some things, we talk about that as gematria. And there's different types of gematria, many different types. Numerology, just like you could find out online, there's different types of numerology and different ways people use it. In the Kabbalistic tradition, there's different types of gematria. And the type that I'll be using and have used almost all of my life is Mispar Katan, which is simply the simple number, right? And that's how I was taught it. And in the simple number, basically, because all of these 22 letters have numbers associated with them and order associated with them. But in Mispar Katan, we always simplify it back to the single digit number. So we take off the zeros, right? Just that simple. So it won't be complicated, it'll be very easy, but it just leads us to understand things and how they come together and the order of things in a special way. So if you remember when we were talking about the Shema as sort of a directive, we talked about not just Moses and Deuteronomy 6:4, where it comes from, but we brought it back to Jacob, right? And we talked about how Jacob studied these letters, these names and these numbers with Shem and Eber, and we talked about the meaning of Shem being name, right? So fast forward, now we're going to dive right into the Shema itself, and just the first 3 words. So the first sentence, many of us know, some of us don't know, never heard it before. In Hebrew is Shema Yisrael, Yud He Vav He, which is spoken Adonai, Eloheinu, Yud He Vav He, Echad. That's the first sentence and the most famous of what we call the Shema. So in this lesson, I'm just going to talk about the first 3 words, which is Shema Yisrael, Yud He Vav He, right? And most particularly the first word. And I mentioned in our first lesson that I'm going to look at it a little differently than is customary. Now, I want to say again and repeat myself that it doesn't mean that I'm saying what is customary is diminished in any way or inappropriate in any way. I'm just saying this is another way to look at it. So most commentaries take the first word, Shema, which means hear or listen, to mean obey, okay? So when it's taught mostly, even in mystical circles, it's taught as Shema Yisrael, like hear this and obey it, okay? What I'm suggesting here is the word has a deeper meaning and a different meaning, and paradoxically, you can look at it both ways is just fine, okay? But what I'm suggesting is Moses is saying, did you hear that? You should hear that, right? If I said in Hebrew, Hu Shema et haruach, Philip would say, you just said, he hears the wind, right? He doesn't mean he obeys the wind. It means he hears the wind. I'm sure we've all heard the wind coming by our windows or walking around. Hu Shema, he hears. Et haruach, he hears the wind. So if we take these first 3 words and look at Shema in terms of actually hearing, we think, hear, Shema, Yisrael, that's us. Yud He Vav He. So what I'm saying is, the directive, in addition to an idea of obedience, which I won't get into at all, you could read 1,000 commentaries that go in that direction. I'm saying the directive is, hear Yud He Vav He. So how do we do that? Well, let's just start off with going back for a second on this word Shema. Since I'm alone here and I have no one to look at the whiteboard, I wrote this down. This is how Shema is spelled. Shin Mem Ayin. So if the Ayin wasn't there, it would be Shem, which means name. And we're saying that Shem is the sort of godfather of our tradition in this meditation practice. Shem and his great-grandson, Eber. We talked about that and what those names mean and so forth. So we have Shem and Shema. The word Shema and the word Shem is very interesting in terms of letter energies, right? Because these 2 are what we call 2 of the mother letters. The mother letters are the very essence, the most primordial sounds of creation, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. So there's a unification of 2 of the most primordial vibrational energies here. And the ayin represents the third eye, where that energy is absorbed, where we could sort of, in a strange way, hear through the third eye. Okay? So we have this word here, and we have the energies of the shin and the mem. And then when we use our form of gematria, misparkatan, which is getting rid of these zeros. So the numerical value of shin is 300. The numerical value of mem is 40. The numerical value of ayin is 70. Okay, so drop the zeros, and you have 14, 7 and 7. Like that. And we talked a little bit about this last week, which is that the inner court, the holy inner court within us is within us, just like it was in the tabernacle in the desert. And the 7 double letters and the number 7 in particular represents that inner sanctum in that inner court within us. So we have Shema, and then we say Shema Yisrael. Here, so the direction to us is to hear what? To hear Yud He Vav He. So we want to listen for that. So if we can all listen for a second, raise your hand if you hear it. Okay, so there must be some way of practice so we can learn to hear Yud He Vav He. Right? If we're going to learn to hear Yud He Vav He, we have to practice listening. And there's no better way to practice listening than our phase 1 meditation, where we take that key using our breath, diving deep within, allowing one of those letters, and they're all connected to this tree that's within us, and that is us. Using that key to open that door. When we open that door, we can hear. So there's just a couple of critical things. This is a very ancient, holy tradition. And these things are kept as very sacred things. So much so that perhaps too much so. But it's understandable that sages and saints and rabbis and mystics would be nervous going into this nuclear power plant of energy with people who are cavalier about it. So I understand on one hand, but paradoxically, it's unfortunate on another hand, right? So it's a prophylactic measure every time Yud He Vav He is written in the Torah, which is thought of as the most powerful of the names of God. We don't say it, we say Adonai. Some folks say don't even think it, just say Adonai. Many of these folks are well-intended, but out of a fear that is not yirah necessarily, might be pachad, afraid to cross a certain border. I don't know. It's not for me to judge. I understand it completely. What I'm saying to you is there's an experience waiting to be had. One of the prerequisites of it is desire. So you need to have the desire as we desire it from our side. Its desire is to be heard. So we desire from our side, and its desire is to be heard. Jacob gathers his sons around him to bless them. He has a desire that they remember what he has taught them, that Shem and Hebrew taught him. And they immediately say, "Hear, Israel, Yud He Vav. Shema, listen, hear, Yud He Vav." So how do we hear it? We hear it by practice. Practice what? We practice letting go. There's a psalm, I forget which one it is. I'm going to say in the 40s, 46 maybe, that says, "Be still to know I am God." And this be still is a letting go. It's a surrender. It's never more difficult for especially religious people to let go in this way, because there's all narratives around things and restrictions, and there's this is right and that is wrong, and this do that and that, it's like the same thing that we exist in this world of these opposites that people cannot unify. What I'm saying is, this directive is to hear, like you would hear the wind going by your room. But if you're not listening, if you got your earbuds in and you're listening to some jerk on a podcast, you're not going to hear the wind, right? So we do what the Sefer Yetzirah tells us to do, which is we close our eyes. We don't use our prefrontal cortex. We let it go. And we surrender and we take it as it comes. What's actually happening is those mother letters that I talked about, Aleph being the pure silence, Mem being the waters of the pure silence, and Shin being the electricity or the fire, coming into emanation, frequency. The Yud energizes the mothers into creation and formation. It's what moves those sounds within us into our space, our inner space, which is the Hay, and sends them forth through the Vav and returns, and they return to the Hay. It's like a feedback cycle. And I'm going to tell you that it's 100% available to you, because I'm saying that only because I've experienced it. Not because someone told me. Someone did tell me, just like I'm telling you. But I would never teach it without first having experienced it. Will it come the exact same way I'm telling you? No. There are other names that may come first. It may come in a permutation of those letters to you. But it's at the very finest relative that exists within us before the Holy of Holies. So my suggestion in this class is that these first 3 words are the most important. They're all important. And as we see, the next 3, we talk about unity in this divine name and in creation. And we get deeper into this in our Sefer Yetzirah class and how it comes and how it is revealed. And I will, when we have our Sefer Yetzirah weekend, we'll do some practices that help us experience coming. So critical is, even your Hebrew letter is a name of quote unquote God. Every one of them. And then there's combinations of them. So this is true in our regular practice of meditation. with just that simple key of the letter that you have. What I'm saying to you guys as advanced meditators that I don't say when I first initiated you into meditation is that at its finest level, it reveals itself to you. So we begin with the breathing, we begin saying the letter, articulating it, then we begin thinking it in terms of a thought, and it fades away and we run with thoughts and we come back with the letter and we come to thoughts and the letter. At some point in that process, it's not you having the letter. The letter is singing to you. And that's what the Shema is teaching us. Listen. Listen and be open and desire to hear Yod He Vav or any other of these holy names. Okay, so with that, I'm going to meditate. And then next week, we'll talk about the next 3 words in this directive or declaration.